Jeremiah chapter 17 verses 1 to 13. This chapter is a continuation of chapter 16, showing the depth of Judah's sin and stating some more reasons for Judah's punishment. 1. The fatal consequences of the idolatry of the Jews, verses 1 to 4. 2. The folly of trusting in man, verses 5 to 8. 3. The folly of trusting one's own heart, verses 9-10. 4. The folly of trusting in riches, verse 11. 5. The folly of failing to trust in the God of all glory, verses 12-13. 6. The malice of the prophet's enemies, verses 14 to 18. 7. The observance of the Sabbath, verses 19 to 27. Pen and paper for Judah's sin, verses 1 to 4. Verse 1. The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron and with the point of a diamond. It is graven upon the table of their heart and upon the horn of your altars. As the prophet begins to describe the character and extent of Judah's sin, he starts with a figure that emphasized the hardness and strength of Judah's rebellion against God. The pen of iron and point of a diamond refer to writing instruments used to make etchings and engravings on metal or stone. Iron denotes it is unbendable. Diamond is known for its cutting powers. Something engraved with an iron pen with a point of diamond would be deeply set. The point of the metaphors is not the hardness of the materials used, but the indelible nature of what is written. The people had many altars set up to Baal. Jeremiah chapter 11 verse 13. Though Josiah had purged the land of these, yet in the 11 years of Jehoiakim's reign, they had multiplied again. The blood of the sacrifices which they offered to idols was sprinkled on the horns of the altar. Idolatry was so notorious in Judah. The people's heart had sins not only written all over it, but etched into it and engraved beyond erasure. The horns of her altars were the external proofs of Judah's idolatry, as the table of her heart was an internal witness. The idea is that Judah's sin was permanently inscribed on their hardened hearts and altars. It cannot be rooted out and will never be forgotten by them. Instead of having God's law engraved in their hearts, Jeremiah chapter 31 verse 33, they have engraved their sins. Verse 2. Whilst their children remember their altars and their groves by the green trees upon the high hills. Their sins were written so deep in their hearts and altars that it could be read for generations. They trained up their children in idolatry when they grew up. The children have their imagination stocked up with idol images and their memories with the frantic rites and ceremonies which they saw their parents observe in their abominable worship. This is a further proof of their long continuance in idolatrous practices and a fresh witness against them. Verse 3. O my mountain in the field, I will give thy substance and thy treasures to the spoil, and thy high places for sin throughout all thy borders. Mountain in the field, it refers to Jerusalem in Judah, which stood on a hill in the midst of a plain, surrounded with fruitful fields and pleasant gardens. Deuteronomy 3:24, Micah 4:2, and Isaiah 2:2. Substance and treasures refers to the products of their country and their accumulated wealth. God will give all the riches of the city and temple which was used for sin and idolatrous practices to the spoil and plunder of the enemy. Jeremiah 15:13 further says that it will be taken for free. This is a further explanation of why God is willing to allow the enemy to take his hill and the possessions of his people. In verse 4, thine heritage is the land of Canaan, which was given to the Israelites for an inheritance and heritage. The people shall discontinue, that is, be removed from their heritage and no longer enjoy the fruits of it. The land would be left alone and not tilled and enjoyed by them. It expresses loneliness and abandonment. Every 7th year, the land was to have its rest or Sabbath, Exodus 23:10-11. But this prescribed law they did not observe. And now, therefore, whether they would or not, God will bring an enemy upon their land, and it shall be desolate as in the year of rest. God will cause her to serve her enemies in the land which she knoweth not, that is, the Babylonians in Chaldea. These people, whom God had called his own, have deeply graven sins in their hearts that God does not claim them any more. His anger is so hot against them that God promised to bring his judgment upon Judah. He allows them to be taken captive into a strange land. The folly of trusting in man, verses 5-8. Verse 5. Thus saith the Lord, Cursed be the man that trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm, and whose heart departeth from the Lord. In these vehement and abrupt words, the Lord gives another reason of the ruin and destruction of the Jews, namely their trust in man and confidence in the creature, that is, in the weak and ineffectual support. Their trust in an arm of flesh had led them to Egyptian and Assyrian alliances, and these in turn to departing from the Lord. The arm of man is not strong enough to do the things that the arm of God can do. When we trust in man's power to save us, it is a denial of our need for the Lord. It is breaking the very first commandment, Thou shalt have no other gods before me. In verses 6-8, the prophet puts before us two highly contradicting pictures, the heath in the desert and the tree by the river. It represents two sets of men, one who depart from the Lord and the other who trusts in the Lord. The presence or absence of the Lord, the fountain of living waters, is what makes the difference between barrenness and fertility. Verse 6. For he shall be like the heath in the desert, and shall not see when good cometh, but shall inhabit the parched places in the wilderness, in the salt land, and not inhabit it. Jeremiah pictured the man who departs from the Lord as heath in the desert. According to Noga Haravani, an expert on plants of the Bible, in Hebrew, the name of this tree is called Arar, which sounds similar to the word for cursed, Arur, and is part of the word play which is central to this poem. It grows in the uninhabited salt lands that surround the Dead Sea where Sodom and Gomorrah once were. Its roots do not extend to the water table below. According to their legends, when God destroyed Sodom, he cursed the fruit of this tree also. When opened, the fruit makes a pss sound and is hollow and filled with webs and dust. The tree has no graceful leaves nor profitableness of fruit. It only serves to make the desolation more desolate. Interestingly, though this tree struggles to live and just manages not to die, the cursed tree looks abundant with fruits, as if it had survived even in hard wilderness times and still has done well in life. Being in such a dry, salty wilderness, it shall not see when good moisture comes from heaven. People who are like these are blind to the sign of the approaching goodness from God. Nothing grows for them. He lives in total desolation, making desolation more desolate. When God's goodness comes upon them, they shall miss of these very good things which they might have had if they had trusted in God. In verse 7 and 8, Jeremiah pictured a man who trusts in God as a tree planted by the river. Verse 8 reminds us so much of Psalm 1:1-3. The beautiful thing is, there is a blessing for those who trust in God. When one trusts in the other, it is naturally impossible that one will not betray or be rebellious to the other. As God promised, since they are rooted in God and observe all the required moisture, 1. They shall be sufficiently supplied with moisture, though the heat be intense and there be no rain. 2. They shall not feel any damage by drought. 3. It shall be strong and vigorous, its leaves always green, and shall produce plenty of fruit in its season. What a wonderful blessing of protection, prosperity, and fruitfulness upon trust in God. The folly of trusting one's own heart. Verses 9-10. Verse 9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? The sequence of ideas seems as follows. If the blessing and curse are so plainly marked in verses 5 to 8, how is it that a man chooses the curse and not a blessing? The portion of the heath in the desert rather than the trees planted by the rivers? And the answer is found in the inscrutable self-deceit of his heart, blinding his perceptions of good and evil. Verse 9 says that the heart is not only deceitful but also desperately wicked. Many have been led to rebellion, disobedience, and great sorrow by following their heart without challenging their heart and judging it against the measure of God's truth. Follow your heart is poor advice when the heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? The heart's deceit and wickedness are advanced enough that even the individual may not know or understand his own heart, and outsiders have even more difficulty in discerning the heart of others. However, verse 10 says that God searches, tests, and knows the heart and the reins, literally kidneys. The two terms heart and kidneys cover the range of hidden elements in a man's character and personality. Nothing is hidden from the Lord. Since God knows our inner self, it is wise to trust what God says about us than what we think or feel about ourselves. The folly of trusting in riches. Verse 11. As the partridge sitteth on eggs and hatcheth them not, so he that getteth riches, and not by right, shall leave them in the midst of his days, and at his end shall be a fool. This is a proverbial illustration of the divine retributive justice. It is meant to show the foolishness of trusting in riches. Not all riches are condemned, only those gained not by right. The folly of getting riches by wrong means is illustrated by the simile of a partridge sitting on eggs and not hatching them. Partridges are birds that go around and gather eggs that are not its own. Then it broods over these eggs in a nest that is not its own. Like a good mother-to-be, the partridge constantly takes care of the eggs as it broods over them. Since neither the eggs nor the nest is its own, it faces the below threats both before it hatches and after it hatches. 1. Some men or wild beasts chase out the partridge and takes the eggs from there. 2. Because the species of the partridge is different from that of the eggs, the incubation temperature given by the partridge for the eggs is different than needed for the egg to hatch. As a result, the eggs get addled, that is, rotten. 3. The eggs are broken by the male partridge through the lust on its female. 4. If the eggs are being brooded in the ground, it gets broken by the foot of man or beast. 5. Since each egg species have different incubation period, when some eggs hatch first, the young ones forsake and abandon her who is not their real mother and depart from the nest to join their own species. Finally, it has none of the young ones with her. They all leave her, nothing to compensate her trouble. The labor of the partridge in brooding over the eggs is all in vain. It cannot keep the young when hatched. It never enjoys the fruit of its labor. It depicted a covetous person who loses his unjustly gotten treasures. He would not enjoy the fruit of his labor despite all the efforts. And at his end shall be a fool. That is, he was a fool all the way through. He has lost his soul to get his wealth, and this wealth he never enjoyed. In the end, he will be shown to be a fool for trusting in his ill-gotten gains. The folly of failing to trust in the God of all glory. Verses 12-13. Here, Jeremiah shows the folly of trusting in anything other than the Lord. He shows by contrast the greatness of trusting God who was symbolically enthroned at the glorious high throne in Jerusalem. The glorious throne is a reference to the sanctuary where the Lord's glorious presence was manifested among the people. The glory of the Lord filled the sanctuary. He set up his glorious high throne in it and dwelt between the cherubim over the mercy seat. It was here that the people fled for refuge in distress. Though such a glorious high throne was in Jerusalem, it was great wickedness and ingratitude in the part of the Jews to forsake and depart from him, his sanctuary, and his worship. Thus they profaned his crown and the place of his sanctuary. This suggests another reason of their destruction. They forsook him as the hope of Israel and the fountain of living waters and placed their hope elsewhere. The Lord says that they would be ashamed. Some of them departed from the Lord. The Lord says that such people shall be written in the earth. They would be noted and recorded in the earth and would come to shame for foolishly rejecting him. Shall be written in the earth. The earthly and carnal men are the ones who depart from the Lord, who is the fountain of living waters. Being sensual and carnal, they mind only to have their name among earthly and carnal things. When they die, they shall have no portion beyond the earth on which they set their affections. Their name and their memory shall rot and perish and become extinct like words written in the earth or dust. In Exodus 32:32, it is implied that the friends of God have their names written in His book. And in Daniel 12:1, this is called the Book of Life. Revelation 3:5, Revelation 13:8, Revelation 20:12, Revelation 20:15, and Revelation 21:27. Written in the earth stands in contrast with this book of God's remembrance. Those whose name are written in the earth will not be registered in the book of life.